Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a world where winter is not a season you admire through glass, but a force that presses its weight directly onto your chest. You are lying in the dark, not because it is late, but because the sun has not yet dared to rise. The cold has already woken you before your thoughts can catch up, creeping through walls made of mud, wattle, and compromise. This is the kind of morning where you probably won't survive this. At least not comfortably, because comfort is a luxury that froze solid weeks ago. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As you settle in, I want you to tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there, because somewhere in the world, someone else is also awake too early, cursing the cold. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before the sun because the sun has nothing to offer you right now. There is no gentle dawn, no golden medieval painting moment. Instead, there is darkness thick enough to feel, pressing against your eyelids even when they are open. Your breath fogs the air inside your own home, which tells you immediately that the fire died hours ago. This is not unusual. Fires are expensive in winter, and embers are guarded like treasure. You do not stretch. Stretching wastes heat. You curl tighter, instinctively, even though your joints protest. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants slept through the night in long stretches or woke frequently. But winter almost certainly forced fragmented sleep. The cold does not allow long dreams. It taps you awake again and again until morning feels less like a beginning and more like a surrender. Your bed is not a bed in the modern sense. It is a raised platform, maybe, stuffed with straw that has long since flattened into something closer to dust. Wool blankets lie on top, heavy and vaguely damp, smelling of smoke, animals, and years of reuse. Linen sheets, if you have them at all, are thin and rough, but they create a barrier between your skin and the scratch of wool. That combination, linen against skin, wool against cold, is a mainstream historical fact of medieval bedding, not a stylistic choice. It is survival engineering. You listen before you move. The house creaks softly, not from ghosts, but from wood contracting in the cold. Somewhere nearby, an animal shifts, maybe a pig in an attached stall, maybe a goat behind a thin wall. That sound matters. Animals mean heat, and heat means you made at least one correct decision before winter arrived. Moving too fast would be a mistake. You sit up slowly, letting your blood catch up. Your feet search for the floor and find it immediately, because the floor is unforgiving. Packed earth, cold as stone, steals warmth instantly. You hiss quietly through your teeth, not loudly, because wasting breath feels wrong, and also because everyone else is still asleep. Winter mornings are quiet by necessity. You reach for yesterday's clothes, which are also today's clothes, and tomorrow's, and probably next week's. There is no wardrobe. Clothing is layered based on need, not style. Wool tunic first, heavy and slightly stiff from smoke. Over that, another layer, patched in places where wear outpaced repair. Linen undergarments cling coldly to your skin before your body warms them. Each layer traps air, and trapped air is the only insulation you can afford. There is a faint light now, not sunlight, but awareness. You know the fire must be addressed before anything else. Hunger can wait. Cold cannot. Archaeological evidence from medieval hearths shows careful construction designed to preserve embers overnight, often buried under ash. This is not laziness. It is strategy. Starting a fire from nothing in winter is not a morning task. It is a gamble. You shuffle toward the hearth, careful not to wake anyone else. Kneeling sends a sharp reminder through your knees, joints stiffened by age, labor, and cold. You brush ash aside with practiced movements, revealing the dull red promise beneath. It is still alive. Relief settles in your chest, small but real. You coax it gently, feeding it splinters saved for this exact moment. Breath. Slow and controlled, not too hard. Too much air kills as easily as too little. As the fire stirs, you hold your hands out, palms aching as warmth returns in painful pins and needles. This exact moment, has likely been repeated millions of times across medieval Europe. Fire before food is not a proverb, but it might as well be. Without heat, nothing else functions. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants consumed more calories in winter to compensate. But the reality is simpler. Without warmth, calories are wasted trying to keep you alive. The fire grows reluctantly, as if offended at being disturbed so early. Smoke curls upward, escaping through a hole in the roof or a primitive chimney, staining beams black over decades. That smoke smell is everywhere, in your hair, your clothes, your skin. There is no such thing as fresh air indoors in winter. Letting heat escape would be foolish. Behind you, someone shifts in sleep. A child, maybe, or a partner, wrapped in the same blankets you left behind. Bodies share heat. This is not romance. It is physics. Entire families often slept in one space, sometimes even one bed, precisely for this reason. A quirky but well-documented detail is that medieval households occasionally rearranged sleeping positions seasonally, packing tighter in winter like human firewood. You add slightly larger wood now, listening for the crackle that tells you it has caught. The light changes subtly, enough to outline familiar shapes. The table, the bench, the hanging tools. Everything is where it should be. Disorder wastes time, and time wastes heat. Only now does hunger make itself known, a dull ache rather than a demand. Breakfast will be thin. You already know that. Winter stores are finite, and every meal is a calculation. Grain porridge warmed by the fire, maybe yesterday's bread revived just enough to be chewable. Fat, if you have it, is precious. Salted scraps are used sparingly. Taste is irrelevant. Warmth and calories matter. Everything else is luxury. You pause, hands still extended toward the fire, and let yourself feel the weight of the day ahead. This is one winter day among many, indistinguishable except for small variations in suffering. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants perceived time cyclically rather than linearly, but standing here, watching fire struggle against cold, it feels less like time and more like endurance. Outside, the world remains dark and frozen. You will step into it soon enough. For now, this fragile circle of firelight is the center of existence. You breathe, slowly, deliberately, conserving energy. The day has begun, not with sunrise, not with hope, but with the quiet victory of not freezing to death in your sleep. The fire is alive now, not strong, but breathing, and that is enough to move you forward. You do not linger longer than necessary, because standing still is a luxury reserved for warm seasons. Heat must be used, not admired. Your stomach reminds you again that food exists, but you ignore it with the practiced discipline of someone who has learned the hierarchy of needs the hard way. Fire comes first. It always does. You reach for the pot before anything else. It hangs from a simple iron hook over the hearth, blackened so completely that its original color is long forgotten. This pot has known more winters than you care to count. Archaeologists find these vessels often, thick-walled and heavy, designed not for elegance but for survival. Thin pottery cracks in cold. This one does not. You lift it carefully, because dropping it would be a catastrophe that no apology could fix. There is still liquid inside. Water from yesterday, faintly smoky, with a skin of ice forming at the edges. That tells you just how cold the night has been. Historians still argue whether medieval homes retained any meaningful overnight warmth at all, but this frozen surface suggests the answer is barely. You set the pot closer to the flame and wait, hands hovering again, palms soaking in whatever warmth escapes. Fire before food also means fire before thought. Your mind clears slowly as the room brightens. Shapes sharpen. The walls are close, closer than memory suggests in summer. Winter shrinks spaces. Smoke lingers heavier, trapped beneath low ceilings, making your eyes sting just enough to keep you alert. You blink it away and focus on routine, because routine prevents mistakes. You kneel again, feeding the fire another measured piece of wood. Not too large. Large logs are for later, when night threatens. Morning fires are coaxed, not indulged. Managing firewood is an ongoing calculation that begins the moment you wake. You count pieces automatically, even if you do not realize you are doing it. One for now. One for later. One saved, always saved, because fear of night outweighs hunger every single time. Outside, the cold presses against the walls as if curious. You can hear it in the silence, a kind of pressure rather than a sound. Wind slips through cracks you will seal later, reminding you that the house is not a fortress, just a negotiation between you and the weather. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood insulation in a technical sense, but they certainly understood drafts, and they fought them with mud, straw, cloth, and stubbornness. The water begins to move, the faintest tremor rippling across the surface. Steam follows, ghost-like and brief. You inhale without thinking, and the warm air fills your chest, carrying the smell of ash and metal. It is not pleasant, but it is comforting. The fire has done its first job of the day. You nod, as if acknowledging a co-worker. Only now do you consider food, and even then, it is framed by heat. You add grain slowly, oats or barley, whatever remains from autumn stores. Grain porridge is the backbone of winter survival, a mainstream historical fact supported by countless records and excavations. Bread is precious. Porridge stretches supplies. Fat, if you have any, comes last, added carefully to boost calories. You stir with a wooden spoon worn smooth by years of repetition. Someone else stirs behind you. A soft sound, half sigh, half groan. They are waking not because they want to, but because the fire crackles just loudly enough to signal morning. Winter compresses sleep. It pushes everyone toward the same schedule whether they agree or not. You do not speak yet. Words waste breath, and breath wastes heat. You glance toward the door. Frost feathers its edges, creeping inward where wood meets air. You will have to go outside soon. That knowledge sits heavy in your chest. Outside is where mistakes happen. Slips, falls, numb fingers that drop tools and never quite regain feeling. Historians still argue how common winter injuries were among medieval peasants, but skeletal evidence suggests broken bones that healed poorly, if at all. Cold makes clumsiness dangerous. Before that, though, there is preparation. Fire before food also means fire before clothing. You step closer to the hearth and begin layering deliberately. Linen first, cold against skin but necessary. Wool next, thick and uneven, smelling faintly of sheep and smoke. Another wool layer, patched where fabric wore thin. Each piece goes on near the fire so it can steal warmth before facing the cold. This is not indulgence. This is efficiency. You hold your outer tunic up to the fire briefly, turning it slowly so heat penetrates the fibers. A quirky but well-attested practice involved warming clothes before dressing, especially footwear, to prevent stiffness and cracking. Cold leather is brittle. You test your boots carefully, flexing them to ensure they will not split. A broken boot in winter is more than inconvenience. It is a countdown. The porridge thickens, bubbling slowly. You stir, watching steam rise and disappear into the darkened rafters. This meal will not be rushed. Eating slowly conserves energy and prolongs warmth. You will sit close to the fire when you eat, maximizing benefit. Taste barely registers. Warmth does. You finally speak, softly to wake the others. Names are murmured. Movements begin. The room fills with quiet activity, layers pulled on, hands extended toward the hearth, small coughs as smoke irritates lungs already tired from years of exposure. Medieval medical texts mention winter cough frequently, though historians still argue whether chronic smoke inhalation shortened lives significantly. You suspect the answer is obvious. You ladle porridge into bowls, careful not to spill. Spilled food cannot be replaced. Each bowl is handed out in turn. Children are fed first, not out of sentiment but strategy. Cold drains them faster. You eat last, standing, spooning warm grain into your mouth, and feeling it settle heavily in your stomach. Calories become heat. Heat becomes motion. Motion becomes survival. Outside, the sky begins to lighten, not with color, but with possibility. Dawn in winter is brief and disappointing. You know better than to expect beauty. Instead, you finish eating. Wipe the bowl clean with bread if you have it, and hang it back in its place. Cleanliness prevents waste. Mice are relentless in winter, and you are competing with them for survival. You take one last moment at the fire, committing its current strength to memory. You will need to recreate this later, from fewer resources. Fire management is not passive. It is a relationship. Historians still argue how much time medieval peasants devoted daily to fire-related tasks, but standing here, it feels like most of your waking life. You open the door, and the cold rushes in immediately, aggressive and unapologetic. The warmth you cultivated retreats behind you as you step out, boots crunching against frozen ground. Fire before food got you this far. Now the rest of the day waits, sharp and demanding, just beyond the threshold. The cold takes you the moment you cross the threshold, as if it has been waiting, patient and certain, just outside the door. It presses into the seams of your clothing, slipping through gaps you know too well. The warmth you built inside collapses behind you, leaving only memory and discipline to carry forward. You do not hesitate, because hesitation invites stiffness, and stiffness invites injury. Layering is not fashion here. It is arithmetic. Every garment represents a decision made months ago, every patch a memory of scarcity. Linen closest to your skin is already losing its borrowed warmth, but it keeps wool from chafing, and that matters over long hours. Wool, coarse and heavy, traps air stubbornly. Medieval inventories consistently list wool as the primary winter textile, not because it was comfortable, but because it worked even when damp. Historians still argue whether peasants owned enough clothing to rotate layers properly, but standing here, you know rotation is a luxury. You wear everything you have. You tighten your belt slightly, not to hold your stomach in, but to prevent cold air from billowing upward beneath your tunic. It is a small adjustment, learned through winters like this one. A quirky but well-documented practice involved tying cloth strips around ankles and wrists to seal warmth. You do the same now. Fingers already clumsy as cold numbs them. You work quickly, before sensation fades too far. Your breath clouds thickly in front of you, each exhale visible proof that your body is burning fuel just to exist. The yard is silent, except for the crunch beneath your boots. Snow, if it fell, has long since hardened into something closer to stone. Ice hides beneath a thin layer of powder, waiting for the careless. You place each foot deliberately, remembering where yesterday nearly ended badly. The animals hear you before they see you. A low shift, a snort, the scrape of hoof against frozen earth. You move toward the shelter where they are kept, attached directly to the house, not out of kindness but efficiency. Animals radiate heat. This is a mainstream historical fact supported by countless medieval floor plans. You share space because survival demands cooperation, even across species. Inside the shelter, the smell hits first. Strong, layered, unmistakable. Manure, hay, animal breath. It is not pleasant, but it is warm. Warmer than outside, at least. You linger for a moment longer than necessary, soaking in the relative comfort. Historians still argue whether peasants perceived this closeness as normal or degrading, but from where you stand, it simply is. You check the animals quickly. Fingers brush flanks, checking for injury, stiffness, signs of illness. Winter kills livestock silently. A goat that does not rise, a cow whose breath sounds wrong. These are disasters unfolding slowly. You murmur without realizing it, a sound halfway between reassurance and habit. The animals shift, steam rising from their bodies like ghosts escaping into the cold. Water is next, and water is dangerous. You carry the bucket carefully, knowing the path by heart. The well lies a short distance away, but distance expands in winter. Ice rims the opening, thick and treacherous. You break it gently, methodically, because splashing wastes energy and soaks clothing. Wet fabric in winter is a sentence you do not want to finish. As you lower the bucket, your shoulders tense. One slip here could mean broken bone, soaked garments, or worse. Skeletal evidence from medieval burial sites shows fractures that healed poorly, suggesting that injuries like these were common and often permanent. Historians still argue how many winter deaths were indirect, caused by falls, infections, and exposure rather than cold itself. The bucket comes up heavy and sloshing. You lift with your legs, not your back, though you would not phrase it that way. You simply know what hurts later if you do not. Ice forms instantly along the rim. You do not pause to admire it. You turn back immediately, boots gripping uncertainly. By the time you return, your fingers burn painfully, sensation returning in sharp needles. You set the bucket down inside, away from drafts, and cover it loosely. Liquid water is precious. Frozen water is work. You have already spent enough energy for this early hour. You glance toward the horizon. The sky has shifted from black to dull gray, offering light without warmth. This is all winter daylight gives you: visibility, not comfort. You breathe deeply, steadying yourself. The day is unfolding exactly as expected, which is both comforting and exhausting. You move back inside briefly, adjusting layers near the fire. Steam rises faintly from your outer garments. You rotate them, warming seams and edges. This is another quiet calculation. How much heat to reclaim now? How much to save for later? Historians still argue whether medieval peasants experienced constant cold stress. But your body answers without words. Outside again, tools wait. Iron stiffens in cold. Wood shrinks. You test handles carefully, flexing them to ensure they will not snap. A broken tool in winter is not just inconvenience. It is lost labor that cannot be replaced until spring. You lean tools where they can catch light, conserving steps. Your muscles finally warm enough to work, not comfortably but sufficiently. You accept this threshold. Comfort is irrelevant. Survival is measured in small successes. No falls, no soaked clothing, no wasted fuel. As you take your first deliberate steps into the day's labor, the cold settles deeper, no longer shocking, just present. It will not leave. It never does. You carry it with you now. Layered beneath wool and habit, a quiet companion that will follow you until darkness returns, and the fire becomes your world again. The wind greets you properly now, no longer tentative, but committed. It moves across the open space with purpose, finding every weakness in your layers as if it knows where to look. You lower your head slightly without thinking, chin tucked, shoulders rounded forward. This posture is not defeat, it is experience. Wind steals heat faster than still air ever could, and medieval winters are generous with it. Your first chores pull you farther from the house, away from the fragile promise of firelight. You glance back once, just long enough to fix the shape of the doorway in your mind. People do this instinctively, historians suggest, because winter travel, even short distances, always carries risk. A fall, a twisted ankle, a sudden numbness that refuses to leave, and the house might as well be miles away. The ground is unforgiving. Frozen ruts from carts and footsteps hardened days ago now form a maze of ankle-breaking traps. You step carefully, placing your feet where you know the earth dips less sharply. Snow hides nothing here. It only disguises danger. Each step is deliberate, measured, slow enough to stay upright but fast enough to keep blood moving. You reach the tools first. They lean against a rough fence, iron dull and rimed with frost. You test them one by one. The shovel's handle creaks faintly as you flex it. Wood shrinks in cold, and cracks that were harmless in summer widen into threats in winter. Historians still argue how often tool failure contributed to lost productivity in medieval agriculture. But you know, even one broken handle could mean a wasted day you cannot afford. You carry what you need toward the animals again. Their shelter steams faintly in the cold air, breath and body heat leaking through gaps in wood and thatch. You pause before entering, listening. Silence inside would be wrong. Shifting hooves, low sounds. These are good signs. You step in, ducking instinctively, and the smell envelops you again, thick and strangely comforting. First, feed. Animals cannot forage now. Everything they eat was harvested months ago and carefully stored. Hay crackles as you pull it apart, frost breaking free in small showers. You distribute it evenly, knowing which animal will push others aside if you are not careful. This knowledge is intimate, learned over years of shared space. A quirky but genuine detail found in medieval husbandry texts describes peasants naming livestock not for affection, but for tracking productivity and health. Names make accounting easier. As the animals eat, you work quickly. You check hooves for ice buildup, brush frost from backs where it has settled. Cold-soaked fur loses insulating power. You do not have the language for insulation, but you understand effect. A damp animal burns more calories to stay warm, and that costs you feed you do not have. You move on to the fence line next, hammer tucked under your arm. Nails contract in cold. Boards shift. Winter is when small failures become disasters. You test posts, driving one loose nail back in with careful strikes. Each hit rings sharply in the cold air, echoing farther than it would in summer. Sound travels differently now, crisp and exposed. Across the field, nothing waits for you. The land lies frozen and indifferent, soil locked beneath ice. You do not waste energy pretending otherwise. Medieval farming calendars clearly mark winter as a season of maintenance rather than production, a mainstream historical fact supported by countless records. Fields demand respect now, not effort. You glance toward them anyway, out of habit. White, gray, and brown stretch outward, broken only by hedges and bare trees. Snow has softened their outlines, making everything look gentler than it is. You know better. Beneath that surface lies work deferred, tension waiting for thaw. Your fingers ache again as you move on to another task, this time repairing a tool handle near the door, where you can retreat if sensation fades too far. You wedge the wood carefully, wrapping it in cloth strips soaked long ago in resin. This is not elegant repair, but it holds. Historians still argue how widespread such improvised fixes were, but archaeological finds suggest ingenuity filled gaps left by scarcity. The cold deepens rather than recedes. Morning has fully arrived, but warmth has not come with it. This realization settles slowly, like fatigue creeping into your muscles. You adjust your layers again, tightening ties, sealing gaps. Every adjustment buys minutes, not comfort. A sound drifts from nearby, voices faint and distant. Neighbors perhaps beginning their own routines. You do not wave. Hands stay close to the body. Community exists here, but it is quiet, practical, unromantic. Survival leaves little room for spectacle. As you finish the last of these first chores, you feel the subtle shift inside yourself. Your body has accepted the cold as constant. It no longer shocks. It persists. This is the point in the day where mistakes happen, not from surprise, but from familiarity. You pause, breathing steadily, and look once more toward the house. Smoke rises thinly from the roof, proof that the fire still lives. Relief flickers again, small but sustaining. You turn back, ready to continue, knowing this is only the beginning of the long negotiation between daylight, labor, and endurance. The path to the water source looks familiar, which is precisely what makes it dangerous. Familiarity dulls caution, and winter punishes that mistake without hesitation. You step away from the shelter of the animals and angle your body into the wind again, carrying empty containers that feel deceptively light now but will soon pull at your arms like anchors. Water is never optional. Fire can be coaxed, food can be rationed, labor can be delayed, but water insists. In winter, it simply disguises its threat beneath ice and snow. Streams narrow, wells stiffen, and every surface pretends to be solid until proven otherwise. The ground slopes slightly downward, and you shorten your stride without consciously deciding to. A fall here would not be dramatic. There would be no heroic tumble, no cinematic slide, just a sudden loss of balance, a hard meeting with frozen earth, and possibly an injury that turns inconvenience into catastrophe. Historians still argue whether winter injuries accounted for a significant portion of medieval mortality, but parish records do show noticeable seasonal spikes. You reach the edge of the stream, or what used to be a stream. Ice spans most of it now, opaque and thick-looking, but experience tells you not to trust appearances. Flowing water eats ice from below, creating traps disguised as safety. You kneel slowly, joints protesting, and test the edge with a stick. The surface holds, but you do not step onto it. You are not reckless. You are cold, not foolish. Instead, you locate the narrow opening where water still moves sluggishly beneath a crust of ice. Breaking it takes effort. The first strike sends a shock up your arm, the vibration sharp and unpleasant. The second opens a small, dark window to moving water. Steam rises faintly, like breath escaping from the earth itself. You work quickly now. Exposed water refreezes fast, and wet hands are a liability. You lower the container carefully, filling it without splashing. Spilled water is wasted effort. Effort is a currency you guard fiercely. A quirky but documented medieval practice involved sprinkling ash or straw around waterholes to reduce slipping. A detail some scholars debate, but one you quietly appreciate when your boots hold steady. The container fills. You lift it, arms tightening, shoulders adjusting to the new weight. Cold water is heavier than it feels, or maybe that is just fatigue speaking. You seal it and tuck it close to your body, cradling it not for affection but insulation. Heat slows freezing. Bodies make decent insulation when nothing else is available. The return trip feels longer. This is another winter trick. Distances stretch when carrying weight and fighting wind. You stop once, briefly, pretending to adjust your grip while actually letting your breath catch up. Steam curls from your mouth in uneven bursts. Breathing too fast invites dizziness. Breathing too slow lets cold settle deeper. You aim for steady. Halfway back, your foot skids slightly. Not a fall. Just enough to remind you how thin the margin is. Your heart jumps anyway, sharp and fast, before you force it down again. Panic wastes heat. You keep moving. At the house, you store the water immediately, setting it near the fire, but not too close. Too much heat cracks containers. Balance governs everything here. You glance at the fire as you pass, reassured by its steady glow. It has not grown stronger, but it has not weakened either. That will do. You return outside once more, because water is never collected just once. Animals drink too, and melted snow is unreliable, dirty, inconsistent, and time-consuming. You repeat the process, slower now, muscles beginning to feel the morning's labor. Each trip compounds fatigue, but skipping one only creates more work later. On the second trip, you notice the ice cracking faintly under pressure nearby, not beneath you, but close enough to raise awareness. You freeze in place, listening. The sound fades. Ice speaks when it wants attention. You give it space and continue. When the final container is secured, you feel a small internal shift, a task completed. These moments matter. They are the pegs on which you hang the rest of the day, proof that progress exists even when warmth does not. Your hands ache as sensation creeps back in, that uncomfortable burn between numbness and pain. You flex your fingers carefully. Medieval medical texts mention frostbite obliquely, often confusing it with other ailments. Whatever its name, you know the feeling well enough to avoid letting it deepen. Back inside, you pause longer this time. You warm your hands near the fire, turning them slowly. Too close risks burns you would not feel until too late. You watch the skin change color, red returning unevenly. This process cannot be rushed. Patience, again. You sip a little of the water, not for thirst, but reassurance. It tastes faintly of earth and iron, cold and clean enough. Your body registers the intake, grateful but unimpressed. It wants more than water, but it will wait. As you straighten, you become aware of the quiet weight settling into your bones. The day has barely advanced, yet you feel older than you did at dawn. Winter compresses time this way, making effort feel outsized and rest feel earned long before it arrives. You glance outside once more. The light has shifted subtly, brighter but no warmer. You adjust your posture, preparing for what comes next, knowing that every task completed now is one less burden waiting for you when darkness returns too early. You turn back toward the animals, not because you particularly want to, but because survival demands it. Their warmth is tangible, a shared reservoir against the cold that seeps into every corner of the house. You pause at the edge of the pen, listening to the low breaths and shifting bodies, and feel the almost imperceptible heat radiating from their forms. In a strange way, you rely on them as much as they rely on you. Living blankets, breathing stoves, stubbornly alive despite everything. The morning sun, a pale disk barely rising above the distant hills, does little to lessen the bite in the air. Its light is more illusion than aid. Frost still grips the ground, and the wind has found new tricks to steal warmth. You carefully distribute food again, moving swiftly yet delicately, knowing that sudden movements cost energy you cannot spare. Every hoof must have access, every neck stretched comfortably. Animals understand hierarchy and hunger. Mismanagement here invites chaos, which is a luxury no winter morning affords. You crouch to check the henhouse. Chickens huddle in corners, feathers puffed, eyes half closed. Their survival strategies mimic yours: minimal movement, body heat preservation. You shake the water container lightly, offering moisture, and they peck reluctantly. Medieval treatises note that poultry in winter often required more attention than livestock because they were fragile yet critical sources of eggs and protein, especially when grains were scarce. You reflect on this, thinking about the balance of necessity and fragility in your daily routine. Beyond feeding, there is maintenance. The barn door has shifted under frost, catching slightly. You adjust the latch carefully, avoiding jerks that might break wood brittle with cold. Tools, sharpened and stored just so, must remain reliable. A failure now could mean hours of wasted labor, or worse, a lost animal. You test hinges and planks systematically, a ritual almost sacred in its repetition. Fringe accounts suggest some peasants would carry secreted lubricants like tallow or animal fat to ease winter creaks, a practice debated by historians but one that makes perfect sense in this frost-bound world. As your chores continue, you notice the quiet rhythm of life here. Hooves scrape lightly, tails swish at flies long dead, breath rises in thin clouds. The farm becomes a living, breathing system of micro-warmth pockets, each supporting the other. You weave through them, understanding the delicate balance, the subtle negotiation between survival, comfort, and the reality of frozen days. By mid-morning, you are hunched slightly, shoulders tight, yet your eyes catch every movement, every minor detail. A cow shifts, a hen flutters, a cat stretches lazily, all minor events that, in their context, mean more than any grand spectacle. You attend to each one with care born of necessity, watching, adjusting, predicting. This is intimacy without sentimentality, knowing needs and meeting them efficiently. Historians still argue whether peasants' survival skills were innate, taught, or a mix of both. From your vantage, it is instinct refined by experience, a combination of understanding patterns, reading the environment, and anticipating both natural and man-made challenges. Every breath, every step, every task is part of a silent conversation with winter itself. The wind picks up, sliding through gaps in walls and fences. You tighten a cloak around your torso and glance skyward. Clouds shift quickly in winter, promising snowfall, or merely a deepening gray that leaches what little color exists from the landscape. You resume work, knowing you have no choice but to endure and continue. By late morning, the first layer of sweat has formed beneath your clothes, not from heat, but from exertion. Even in cold, bodies generate moisture that chills when paused, so movement must be balanced with careful monitoring. You feel the fine tremor in your fingers, a sign to pause briefly and adjust. Winter demands mindfulness in small doses, Yet you cannot indulge distraction. The animals, fully fed and checked, are your next focus. You sweep through the barn, brushing away frost and loose straw, creating comfortable nests for them to return to after the day's intermittent labors. Comfort now is as crucial as nutrition. Low temperatures sap resistance to illness quickly, and minor discomfort can escalate into serious consequences. You observe, adjust, and then step back to review the scene. Efficient, necessary, survival-driven. Midday approaches, though the light deceives you with its gray pallor. Shadows lengthen subtly despite the sun's height, a reminder that winter's day is always short. You pause momentarily, letting the body rest in a standing stretch, eyes drifting over the snow-laden fields beyond the barn. Each frozen expanse is a reminder of the day's limits, of the careful rationing of energy and time, of the continuous negotiation with cold that dominates every waking hour. As you prepare to move indoors for the next sequence of tasks, repairing, mending, and preparing for the long, early dusk, you take stock of yourself and your surroundings. Survival is not merely feeding animals or stacking wood. It is the constant awareness, the rhythm, the layering of effort, caution, and knowledge that keeps life moving forward in these harsh conditions. Each movement, each action is a small victory against the winter's indifferent hold. The first meal of the day is modest, but in winter, modesty is a kind of triumph. You sit near the hearth, still damp from your water runs and labor among the animals, and lift a wooden bowl filled with gruel steaming faintly. Its aroma is earthy, warmed by the smoke and heat of the fire, rather than any spices or indulgence. Every spoonful is measured, eaten slowly, not for flavor, which is negligible, but for caloric insurance against the hours ahead. Hunger is predictable, but exhaustion is unpredictable. Each bite is a negotiation between immediate comfort and long-term survival. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants ever truly enjoyed such food or simply adapted to it, finding satisfaction in sustenance itself. You, in this moment, understand both perspectives. There is something quietly satisfying in routine and predictability. Yet, even as warmth spreads slightly from the bowl to your belly, your mind notes the chill elsewhere. Damp socks, stiff joints, the faint draft near the roof. The fire crackles, and you adjust logs, stoking embers while avoiding smoke that threatens to sting your eyes. Medieval households relied heavily on careful fire management. Too little and frost would penetrate the body. Too much, and resources vanished. Fringe accounts suggest that some peasants sprinkled damp straw over embers at night to prolong the heat, a trick debated among scholars, but one that feels intuitively clever. You have done something similar with the morning ash, layering fuel for gradual, controlled warmth. As you eat, the animals stir around you, murmuring in their low, familiar voices. They are a constant presence, providing warmth, company, and even emotional steadiness. You notice the subtle symbiosis. The fire warms them as it warms you, and the heat retained in their bodies spreads gently back to your own through the cold air of the room. Even a medieval observer might have understood this as a practical form of shared survival, though probably not poetic. The bowl empties slowly. Each swallow demands a pause to breathe, to allow the stomach to accept the cold-tinged warmth. Outside, the wind rattles against shutters, a reminder that the world beyond your walls does not yield. You glance at your hands, chapped and reddened, flexing fingers to maintain circulation. Every movement is a micro-strategy against cold, learned over years of repetition, reinforced by necessity. Fatigue, however, is relentless. You will pay for exertion and later aches and pains if careful attention falters. You notice a slight shift in the light through the small window. Sunlight, thin and weak, filtering through frost patterns on the glass. Even in winter, the day follows its arc, and daylight defines the rhythm of labor. You take this moment to plan which chores demand immediate attention, which can be delayed, which risks are tolerable, and which must be avoided. This kind of mental triage is as vital as physical labor. Missteps are punished quietly but cruelly in the winter months. After the meal, you carefully scrape the bowl clean, returning it to its resting place. Tools of survival are not treated as disposable. They are assets, to be maintained with care. You glance at other vessels, at the kettle warming over the fire, at small scraps of bread saved for later. Even minor items are vital in a world where effort cannot be wasted. The wind outside intensifies, rattling loose snow along the roof and against the walls. You glance at the door, considering the next round of tasks, tending animals again, gathering more fuel, checking fences, perhaps even venturing briefly into the fields. The day's responsibilities are layered like your clothing, each added task necessary, each additional exertion calculated. Efficiency is survival. Scholars still debate how much agency peasants truly had over their routines versus responding to environmental demands, but you understand the blend of choice and compulsion perfectly. You move deliberately, finishing one small task before beginning another, aware that wasted effort is equivalent to a lost meal or a frostbitten hand. Every action carries consequences beyond the immediate moment. You adjust a bundle of straw near the animals, checking its dryness and positioning to maximize insulation. You untangle a rope left near the door, shaking off frost to prevent cracking. These minutiae, easily overlooked, determine comfort, safety, and survival in ways outsiders rarely comprehend. By mid-morning, a quiet rhythm sets in. Food eaten, water collected, animals tended, and fuel checked. Now the day becomes a series of repetitions interwoven with brief assessments of condition, temperature, and necessity. The winter day, though harsh, is structured. A predictable march of chores and survival strategies punctuated by brief moments of reflection and observation. Even humor, fleeting as it is, arises in these spaces: the cat's awkward leap, a sheep's stubborn stance, the way the fire hisses at a damp log. Small absurdities, quietly noted, provide mental reprieve. You pause at the threshold of the barn, taking in the animals, warmth one more time. The day has begun in earnest, but there is much to accomplish before early dusk. Outside, the fields glimmer white, unyielding, indifferent. Inside, warmth persists, fragile and precious. You move forward, aware that each task completed, each small victory, accumulates against the relentless cold. The daylight is brief, and you know every minute counts. You step outside again, this time with purpose beyond feeding or tending. Today requires decisions about which labor is essential and which can wait. Winter dictates your priorities, and energy, your currency. Every choice carries weight. A misstep could cost warmth, food, or the fragile health of both you and your animals. You trudge across the frost-crusted yard, boots crunching through hardened snow, muscles stiff from the morning's exertion, and feel the cold gnawing at the gaps between wool and linen. Each step is deliberate, conserving strength where you can. You move toward the storage shed first, assessing tools and supplies. There is a rhythm to this work, almost meditative despite the cold and fatigue. Hammers, tongs, shovels, and scythes all must be accounted for, checked, and maintained. A broken tool now is a disaster. In winter, time and effort are not easily recovered. You run your fingers along handles, testing for splits, adjusting placement, noting which might require repair before tomorrow. Medieval peasants were acutely aware of the fragility of their implements. Some even applied secret oils or fats to preserve wooden handles. A practice historians still debate, yet you know the logic behind it instinctively. The fields beckon, though offering little reward. Frost bites at soil and grass, reducing everything to silence under white, unyielding surfaces. You pause at the edge, contemplating the futile labor that once might have produced sustenance, but now only promises exhaustion. You pick a patch of earth, testing its hardness. Frozen solid, it refuses plowing, planting, or digging. Fringe accounts suggest some peasants would turn to small winter tasks, like pruning or clearing debris, though the efficiency of such work is contested by scholars. For you, every task is a negotiation with both necessity and futility. You decide to focus instead on smaller, manageable outdoor tasks. Clearing paths between barns and the main house, adjusting fences, and moving straw to more sheltered locations. These efforts may seem trivial to outsiders, yet in winter they prevent injury, improve efficiency, and retain warmth. Every bit of preparation now prevents compounded suffering later. You notice how the wind curls around corners, how snow drifts shift unexpectedly, and how frost clings to gates and roof edges. Observation, subtle but constant, guides your decisions more than brute effort. Mid-morning shadows stretch unnaturally, reminding you that winter compresses the daylight hours. The sun, weak and low, offers minimal relief against the bitter air. You pull your cloak tighter, ensuring layers overlap to minimize exposed skin. You pause briefly to breathe, noticing the rhythm of your own pulse against cold and exertion. Energy management is critical. Overexertion leads to tremors, shivering, or worse. Historical records suggest that medieval peasants often timed their heavier labor for the warmest part of the day, though precise habits varied widely across regions. You follow this instinctively, a tacit understanding of natural limits. The livestock demand another check. You visit the sheep first, adjusting their bedding and ensuring straw is fluffed to conserve heat. Their wool seems almost magical now, insulating bodies against extremes that you can only partially resist. Each movement is deliberate. Too sudden, and heat dissipates. Too slow, and energy is wasted. You refill water troughs, checking carefully for ice, breaking frozen crusts without spilling the liquid. You marvel at the subtle intelligence required to maintain balance between energy expenditure and warmth retention. Even the cats and dogs, companions in both heat and security, are subtly woven into this rhythm, padding along behind or curling near embers when indoors. You notice, while distributing feed, the subtle hierarchy of the barnyard. Dominant animals claim warmth and space first. The weaker ones adapt or submit. You manage the dynamics carefully, avoiding conflict, ensuring each animal has access to both food and shelter. This social navigation is quiet but vital. A misstep here ripples across survival, comfort, and efficiency. You reflect briefly on how human and animal interactions in this context echo similar principles: negotiation, observation, and small-scale diplomacy, all under the oppressive weight of winter. The wind strengthens suddenly, gusting through the yard with a sharp bite that pushes you backwards slightly. You brace yourself, gripping the fence, appreciating the protection your small buildings provide. Every structure, from house to barn to shed, is a strategic asset, resisting cold, wind, and snow. Maintenance is ongoing, even as you move from chore to chore. Medieval manuals occasionally reference simple techniques for sealing doors and windows against frost, though debates persist on how widespread and consistent such practices were. You rely on instinct and past experience more than theory, adjusting gaps, stacking straw, and ensuring entryways remain secure. By noon, the briefest hint of warmth returns with the weak sun, but the cold is relentless. You pause in a sheltered corner, leaning against wood warmed slightly from earlier sun exposure. You reflect on the rhythm of your day, feeding, tending, assessing, maintaining, and surviving. Each segment, though seemingly mundane, is a critical step in enduring the long, frozen hours. The day is a sequence of small victories against an indifferent winter, each one meticulously earned and observed. You glance toward the distant hills, noticing how snow and ice shape every familiar contour differently each morning. Movement across the land is slower than you would prefer, but safety demands caution. Every decision, every path chosen, every task prioritized, is an exercise in judgment honed by necessity. Historians still argue whether the peasant's life was entirely dictated by environmental pressures, or if elements of planning, foresight, and personal choice played as significant a role. For you, it is a blend, instinct guided by knowledge, effort guided by observation, and survival dictated by both. As noon approaches its peak, you prepare to transition to indoor tasks, knowing the short daylight cannot be wasted. Your breath forms clouds in the air, mingling with the smoke from your morning fire. Each inhalation, each movement, each careful adjustment of clothing or tools is part of a continuous negotiation with cold. Every choice made outside now informs efficiency and comfort for the rest of the day. This is survival at its most methodical, a careful orchestration of energy, heat, and practical knowledge. You step toward the fields again, a stretch of white and gray stretching endlessly under the pale winter sun. The earth is unyielding, frozen to a depth that mocks any attempt at cultivation. The furrows and ridges you once plowed for spring planting are invisible beneath this season's blanket, and you know that any physical exertion here is a gamble. Snow crunches beneath your boots with each careful step, and you feel the cold gnawing through multiple layers of wool and linen. Your fingers, despite gloves and mittens, sting with numbness that threatens dexterity. Yet you press on, because the land must be checked, if only to gauge its hidden hazards and to plan for any small action you might take before winter's grip loosens. You pause to consider the absurdity and endurance of your existence here. The field offers nothing today. No crops, no warmth, no immediate reward. Scholars still argue whether medieval peasants accepted these pauses as inevitabilities, or if they were sources of anxiety and stress. To you, the frozen soil is both enemy and companion, a silent teacher of patience. You test patches with a wooden stick, discovering slight variances in frost depth, noting where wind has scoured the snow into icy drifts, and where pockets of straw or debris might have preserved some warmth. Even futility requires observation, and in observation lies survival. Small winter tasks become your focus. Clearing broken branches that fell under the weight of ice, patching fence lines, stacking stray stones into tidy piles that might shield the weaker animals or mark the boundaries clearly. These acts seem trivial, but each one lessens the potential for injury or waste later in the season. You move with a rhythm, alternating between bending, lifting, and brushing snow from surfaces. Your body, despite shivering and stiffening muscles, is attuned to the repetition, as if each motion is part of a long, instinctive choreography developed through winters past. You notice how the sky shifts subtly, clouds rolling in to mute the sunlight. Shadows stretch differently now. Light barely penetrates the gray overcast, reflecting the mood of the frozen landscape. You adjust your gait, favoring paths that have been tread more recently, lest you slip on hidden ice or lose time battling drifts. Each footfall is deliberate, conserving energy while maximizing safety. Even simple navigation demands focus. The land's neutrality is deceptive, full of hidden threats for those unobservant or rushed. Medieval records indicate that injuries from frozen terrain were common, yet the methods of mitigation, path marking, careful pacing, and community signaling were highly localized and variable. Your attention turns briefly to wildlife. Crows and sparrows hop across the snow, searching for seeds or scraps, their tiny lives a mirror of your own struggle against scarcity. You observe their movements and note their behavior for clues about weather or snow depth in adjacent areas. While not conscious of it in historical terms, such observation was a survival tool. Understanding animal patterns helped anticipate the challenges of foraging and maintaining livestock. Some fringe accounts suggest peasants even used trained animals to gauge weather shifts, though historians debate the prevalence of this practice. Regardless, you watch keenly, adapting your decisions according to patterns in the small, persistent life that endures alongside you. By late morning, your endurance is tangible in every muscle. Your breath comes in clouds, limbs ache under layers of heavy wool, and yet the rhythm of purposeful labor keeps you alert. You carry small bundles of firewood from one storage area to another, replenishing stacks closer to home. You smooth snow from pathways connecting barns and outhouses, knowing that a fall or misstep now could sap energy or cause injury that would jeopardize the day's survival. The combination of observation, preparation, and movement forms a continuous mental calculation, a subtle interplay between instinct, learned knowledge, and immediate necessity. The animals again demand a check. You approach the barn, noticing how sheep cluster tightly, wool bristling against frost, and how goats push subtly for warmth and dominance. You distribute fresh straw to maintain insulation, carefully observing the hierarchy as weaker animals find spaces close to walls or near the hay pile. You take time to ensure water troughs remain accessible, cracking ice gently without spilling liquid. Livestock are both companions and heaters, and managing their energy and heat is as much a survival skill as feeding or clothing yourself. You marvel at the silent cooperation that develops across species under the pressures of winter. In your brief respite leaning against a cold wooden post, you notice the light changing. Snow glints faintly in uneven rays, casting delicate shadows across the field's frozen surface. The subtle interplay of light and frost is almost hypnotic, a small aesthetic reprieve from the grind of survival. You allow your mind a momentary drift, recalling how winters have repeated this pattern across generations, how human ingenuity is shaped by relentless climate, and how, despite hardship, these small routines instill a quiet rhythm in otherwise unforgiving days. As midday approaches, you prepare to shift focus. The fields offer little, and indoor work now beckons. Every choice in winter is strategic. You must ration your energy, divide tasks efficiently, and anticipate evening demands. Walking back to the house, you leave the expanse of white behind, noting the subtle shifts in snow and ice that may indicate the need for attention later. Each task performed outdoors feeds into indoor efficiency. Every movement outside is preparation, observation, and foresight rolled into one continuous effort. Your body aches, but the mind remains vigilant, guiding you toward the next phase of survival. You step back into the warmth, or what passes for warmth, of your modest dwelling, the chill clinging to your clothes like an unwelcome companion. The wind slaps against wooden walls and rattles window panes as though testing your resolve, reminding you that even within these meager defenses, winter's presence remains absolute. You shake snow from boots and garments, and with each movement, you feel the ache of the frozen land lingering in muscles, a dull reminder of hours spent in unyielding frost. Daylight has already begun its slow retreat. In the heart of winter, the sun barely claims the sky, and shadows stretch long and cold across the floor. Indoor work now dominates your attention. You sit near the embers you carefully nurtured earlier, appreciating their soft glow, and begin mending tattered garments. Each stitch is deliberate, a blend of necessity and art, preserving warmth where cloth has worn thin. The wool you layer into patched coats and mittens carries the faint odor of lanolin, a scent that evokes both comfort and toil. Scholars still argue whether medieval peasants approached such repairs as purely practical or as a form of quiet, meditative craft. To you, it is both, a necessity that keeps you moving, focused, and connected to the small details of daily survival. The rhythm of repair work is punctuated by small household rituals. You grind coarse grains into flour using a hand mill, stirring, sifting, and bagging portions for future use. A kettle simmers with water for tea or broth, releasing thin spirals of steam that fog nearby windows. You glance occasionally at wooden tools lying dormant, assessing what may need sharpening or realignment. This constant negotiation with material objects is a hallmark of winter life. Nothing is idle, nothing is expendable, and every effort has a measured purpose. The balance of energy and time is delicate. One wrong calculation could leave you shivering without adequate fuel or sustenance. Your mind wanders, as it must, toward the broader picture. The frozen land outside offers no immediate reward, yet the cumulative effect of indoor work ensures your capacity to survive the remaining hours. You inspect and sort collected firewood, stacking pieces in precise arrangements that maximize airflow and prevent rot. You check the stability of the hearth, repositioning stones and tending the small embers with careful hands. Even these quiet tasks require attentiveness. In medieval times, fires were not merely for warmth, but for cooking, water purification, and sometimes for signaling within the community. Historians still debate how widespread certain hearth management practices were, but your routine reflects a combination of inherited knowledge and personal experience. Children's laughter or cries do not interrupt this solitude. In some households, the young assist with chores, but you are largely alone with your rhythm. The cold outside seeps in through every crack, and yet this enforced stillness provides a counterbalance to the exhausting labor outdoors. You carve small implements, whittle bits of wood into simple shapes for practical use, and even fashion minor decorations to brighten the dim interior. These small touches, though not vital to survival, remind you that human life persists through ritual, creativity, and the persistent assertion of domestic order. The midday sun, faint as it is, begins its slow dip toward the horizon. Shadows grow long and darken corners of the room, emphasizing the contrast between light and gloom. You adjust your focus to prepare for the next phase, tending animals and checking on the stove before the evening meal. Medieval winter days demand fluid transitions. Indoor tasks fill gaps left by outdoor impossibilities, each step a preparation for the night ahead. Energy conservation remains paramount, as even minor exertion can sap strength needed to endure darkness and cold. You take a brief pause, sipping from a mug of broth that warms your hands more than your body. The taste is simple yet nourishing, infused with small scraps of preserved vegetables and a hint of salt. You reflect on the ingenuity necessary to create sustenance from sparse resources. The careful planning of stored food, the preservation of what little can be carried through frozen months, and the improvisation required when supply falters. Fringe accounts suggest some peasants even fermented vegetables in small hidden containers to preserve nutrients, though historians debate the prevalence of such practices. Your eyes wander to the small window overlooking the fields. Ice-laced panes distort the view, turning the outside world into a painting of white and gray. You see drifted snow, the faint tracks of animals, and the glimmer of sunlight on frozen surfaces. Even in this frozen tableau, Life moves in subtle ways. Birds flitting across the landscape, the slow swaying of trees, and occasional glimpses of neighboring homesteads, all sharing the burden of winter. Community and solitude exist simultaneously, each reinforcing your awareness of dependence, both on your own diligence and the unseen efforts of others. Tasks continue as you rotate between sowing, stirring, sharpening, and inspecting. Your breath forms small clouds near the hearth, mingling with the scent of smoke, wood, and lanolin. Each action is rhythmic, almost meditative, and serves to maintain a sense of control amid the harshness of the environment. Energy is spent thoughtfully, not frivolously. Even small miscalculations, spilling a few embers, breaking a tool, letting an animal freeze, carry consequences. This constant negotiation between effort, reward, and survival is the invisible scaffolding of medieval winter life. As the late afternoon creeps toward early dusk, you begin to prepare for the final round of outdoor checks. Tools, animal shelters, and storage areas must be reassessed before darkness. Even this seemingly minor phase carries strategic importance. Ensuring pathways are clear, water is accessible, and any unexpected hazards are mitigated. The day's labor forms a continuum. Indoor efforts are inseparable from outdoor vigilance. Each stitch, each fire-tended ember, each sorted log contributes to a web of preparation, ensuring that as night falls, you are as ready as humanly possible to endure the cold, dark hours that lie ahead. The brief afternoon light fades almost unnoticed, swallowed by the low winter sun that barely lifts above the horizon. You glance toward the window, noting how quickly shadows stretch across the floorboards, creeping toward your workbench and hearth. Outside, frost clings stubbornly to every exposed surface. Wooden fences, wagon wheels, and thatched rooftops alike, each glittering like a fragile armor against the harsh reality of winter. You pause, feeling a shiver that is not fully quelled by your layered clothing or the modest hearth, a reminder that even prepared bodies remain vulnerable to the season's relentless grip. The rhythm of your indoor tasks shifts as you consider the approaching evening. Sewing and mending garments, once meditative, now take on a practical urgency. Any delay could leave family members or animals exposed when night fully settles. You inspect mittens, tunics, and patchwork blankets, feeling the frayed fibers and imagining how they will fare against the creeping cold. Historians still argue whether peasants' repair techniques were consistent across regions or evolved independently in each household. But your methods are born from both necessity and learned habit, a blend of inherited wisdom and personal adaptation. Small chores expand into larger assessments. You check that firewood is stacked with care, inspecting for rot or dampness, then pull forward a few key logs to maintain a steady flame through the long night. Sparks flicker as you adjust embers, their tiny orange tongues, a quiet reassurance against the encroaching darkness. The interplay of light and shadow in the room emphasizes the starkness of your surroundings, highlighting the gaps in walls and the slight drafts you must constantly counter. Even minor oversight could transform discomfort into danger. Attention turns to stored food. You lift wooden covers and linen wrappings, assessing grains, salted meats, and preserved vegetables. Each morsel carries value far beyond taste. It represents planning, forethought, and sometimes sheer luck. A misjudged portion could force rationing that leaves the household weakened before morning. Fringe historical accounts suggest that some peasants would hide small caches of food from even family members, though scholars debate how widespread such secrecy truly was. You, however, focus on careful distribution, mindful that shared survival depends on measured fairness and foresight. Amid these necessary routines, you take moments to listen. The low howl of wind outside, the creak of timber, and occasional clatter of animals settling in their stalls form a soundtrack of endurance. Even indoors, the environment demands vigilance. Snow-laden roofs can collapse, water pipes or troughs can freeze, and animals require monitoring. Each task you complete is a small victory against the indifferent forces of nature, a tangible proof of agency in a world that offers little reprieve. Your movements are deliberate, conserving strength while maintaining essential oversight. You examine the hearth once more, noting how quickly it cools when neglected. A thin column of smoke rises, carrying warmth to the upper reaches of your home while scenting the air with the faint aroma of burned wood. Cooking will come later, but tending fire now ensures a consistent core temperature that prevents sudden chills from sapping energy. In medieval times, fire management was central to daily survival, not merely comfort. Without careful attention, the household risked hypothermia or illness. Scholars still debate the variety of fuels used in different regions, from straw and peat to wood and coal, but you rely on what is accessible, balancing burn rate against availability. The muted light outside gradually softens, reflecting off snow and ice, while indoors, you begin preparing simple tools for evening routines. Wooden spoons, bowls, and knives are arranged in accessible positions. You check that containers of water remain unfrozen, scraping thin layers of ice where necessary. Even these small adjustments require foresight. Every ounce of effort preserves bodily warmth and household function. You pause, stretching aching limbs that protest after repeated movements, reminding yourself that endurance is both physical and mental, a daily negotiation between fatigue and necessity. As dusk approaches, the communal rhythm of the village starts to become perceptible. Though you live mostly in solitude, distant sounds of neighbors tending fires, guiding animals, or calling to one another through snowfall remind you that this struggle is shared. Community bonds are subtle yet powerful. Brief greetings, exchanged firewood, or advice on preserving food contribute to a social fabric that supports survival. Anthropologists note that such small-scale interactions were crucial for maintaining morale and practical knowledge during harsh winters, though historians still debate the precise extent of cooperative practices versus isolated self-reliance. You gather materials for mending outdoor gear and ensure that any tools left outside are secured or retrieved. Rope, leather straps, and simple harnesses are inspected, repaired, or replaced. Snow-laden ground outside will soon make travel treacherous, so preparation is vital. Each step in this sequence, from inspecting indoor items to ensuring outdoor readiness, is part of a continuous chain of survival practices. The medieval day does not pause, nor does winter's bite. Your endurance depends on anticipating every eventuality and acting preemptively. Finally, as shadows dominate corners of the room, you take a moment to breathe. The day's labor is far from over, yet you feel a measured satisfaction in the progress made indoors. Your movements, once frantic and early morning cold, now possess a steady cadence, shaped by hours of experience. The interplay of light, temperature, and task creates a rhythm that sustains body and mind. Even amid scarcity and relentless cold, small victories, mended clothing, steady embers, accessible water, reassure you that the cycle can continue, and that the night, though formidable, can be endured with preparation and care. The light outside continues its slow retreat, and you notice the icy air pressing harder against the walls of your home. By midday, even the comfort of your hearth feels insufficient. The cold seems to seep through timber and stone alike, reminding you that winter does not negotiate. You trudge from one corner to another, adjusting blankets on sleeping children or animals, checking water containers for thin ice, and ensuring that firewood stacks remain ready for the night. Every task is a negotiation with the elements, a careful balance between conserving energy and maintaining essential warmth. Fringe historical accounts suggest that some peasants used heated stones or animal skins as primitive radiators, though historians still argue whether this was widespread or regionally specific. You pause briefly at the window, studying the village as snowflakes drift lazily, masking the rough textures of thatch and timber. In the distance, a neighbor trudges through thick drifts, bent low against wind, carrying what looks like a bundle of firewood. These moments remind you that even as each household faces its trials alone, the visual rhythm of shared hardship provides both warning and reassurance. Survival depends not only on personal diligence but also on observation. The choices of others hint at dangers you might otherwise miss. It is in these quiet glances that you see the unspoken network of human endurance. Turning back indoors, you consider the day's remaining tasks. The livestock requires attention. The animals, breath steams in the cold, eyes half closed against frost. You clear frozen water troughs, brushing away ice, and feed them modest rations, mindful of the limited stores. Each act is a compromise between immediate comfort and long-term preservation. Too much exertion risks chilling your own body. Too little care endangers the creatures that provide warmth, milk, or labor. Medieval peasants understood this delicate balance intuitively, though historians still debate the extent to which written manuals or folk knowledge guided these daily decisions. Your hands now stiff from cold and work, you return to indoor mending. Wool socks, patched tunics, and frayed mittens are handled with careful repetition, a meditative process that stretches and warms muscles in tandem. You reflect on the ingenuity required. Needles bent, thread doubled, and knots tied to withstand both winter wear and the rough handling of labor. In a sense, each stitch is an act of quiet rebellion against nature's indifference, a mark of human persistence within a harshly ordered world. Fringe sources suggest that some households added animal hair or plant fibers for insulation, though historians continue to debate the prevalence and effectiveness of these methods. Midday meals are sparse but essential. You prepare a simple pottage of grains, occasionally enhanced with dried herbs or salted meat. The steam rising from the cooking pot provides brief comfort, filling the room with warmth and scent. You eat slowly, savoring heat and sustenance over flavor, understanding that survival is measured in energy retained rather than culinary pleasure. Anthropological studies of medieval diets note that even modest caloric intake could stave off hypothermia when combined with strategic clothing and shelter, though historians still argue about the precise nutritional adequacy available to common peasants. Between bites, you observe how shadows lengthen across the floor, evidence of the sun's low winter path. Tasks must be prioritized. Those requiring daylight are completed first, while indoor work can continue under dim firelight. You sort materials for evening repairs, double-check firewood, and arrange bedding for maximum heat retention. Even in these small domestic details, a strategy emerges. Every movement, every decision is informed by the inevitability of night and cold. Medieval survival demanded this constant foresight, a mental labor as taxing as the physical. As the day progresses, the cold becomes almost tactile, pressing against skin despite layers of wool and linen. You wrap hands in additional cloths while fetching water, adjusting the fire's airflow to maximize heat without wasting fuel. You note that the animals' proximity contributes significantly to the household's warmth. Their shared body heat, though modest, creates a subtle but critical buffer. Historical accounts highlight that sleeping arrangements often prioritized livestock nearby, though scholars still debate the frequency and risks involved in mixing animal and human spaces during harsh winters. You take a moment to observe the village landscape again. Footprints in snow trace the passage of neighbors, a patchwork of human effort across an indifferent white expanse. Smoke rises from chimneys, signals of life and survival, while the low sun glints off frost-encrusted roofs. Each sign is both practical and psychological, reassurance that survival is possible, a reminder that the world continues its cycle regardless of individual struggle. You carry this awareness inward, letting it inform your next set of preparations. The rhythm of tasks, feeding, mending, tending fire, continues seamlessly. Each repetition strengthens muscle memory and cultivates patience. Even the minor inconveniences, a frozen bucket or a stubborn seam, become small exercises in problem-solving, honing the mind as much as the body. These repeated micro-challenges form the backbone of survival, the unnoticed training that ensures readiness when conditions worsen. Historians still debate how much these daily routines were culturally transmitted versus learned experientially, yet their importance is undeniable. By the end of midday, the household is functional, safe, and warm enough to withstand the creeping evening. You step back briefly, noticing the interplay of light, shadow, and movement within your home. Every action taken, from the careful distribution of firewood to the meticulous mending of garments, represents a tiny victory against winter's relentless insistence. Even as fatigue sets in, a sense of accomplishment threads through the day, a fragile but resilient acknowledgement that preparation and vigilance can bend the season's harshness to your survival, if only temporarily. The light outside dwindles further, and the cold begins to gnaw at even the sturdiest corners of your home. Midday warmth, if there was any, has long departed, leaving only the lingering chill in your bones and the faint smoke from your fire curling against timber beams. You notice how the walls seem to absorb heat and then release it slowly, a reminder that medieval homes, though modest, were living organisms in their own right, reacting to each flicker of flame and gust of wind. Some sources suggest that straw-filled walls and compacted earth floors provided insulation, though historians still debate the consistency of these materials across villages and regions. You move carefully around the hearth, adding small logs to maintain a steady flame, mindful that too large a fire risks consuming precious wood too quickly. Each piece of wood is valuable. There is no margin for excess in winter. You pause to adjust the blankets over children or elderly relatives, tucking them closer to both the fire and each other. The room is a living web of warmth, bodies and materials intertwined in a delicate balance against frost. Fringe accounts hint that some households even placed heated stones beneath bedding, a practice that might seem eccentric today but made practical sense when survival demanded ingenuity. Outside, the wind has picked up, rattling thatched roofs and bending tree branches under the weight of ice. You glance briefly through the frosted window to gauge the conditions and catch a glimpse of neighbors performing similar routines, tending livestock, hauling wood, or simply huddling indoors. These shared visual cues, while brief, form a silent network of survival strategies, an unspoken communication of effort and vigilance. Historians still argue whether communities coordinated explicitly during harsh winters or relied more on parallel individual initiative, but the repeated patterns of labor and observation suggest a mixture of both. Returning to indoor tasks, you consider the animals, who now press closer for warmth as evening approaches. Their breathing clouds the air with steam, each exhale a transient comfort in a cold room. You distribute feed sparingly, aware that their rations are as limited as yours. Every action, feeding, moving, checking water, is calculated to maintain equilibrium between conserving energy and meeting essential needs. Anthropological studies suggest that even modest animal proximity could significantly reduce household energy expenditure, though scholars debate whether peasants consciously optimized these benefits or simply adapted instinctively. The hearth's glow illuminates the worn textures of your home: cracked wood, straw-strewn floor, and patched textiles. Each imperfection is a testament to resourcefulness, a visual record of prior winters endured. You find yourself tidying, repairing, and reinforcing, not out of aesthetic desire but sheer necessity. Stitched garments, patched roofs, and insulated walls are both practical and emblematic, signaling a life lived in continuous negotiation with nature's demands. Some fringe sources claim that reflective metals or tallow coatings were used to improve insulation, though historians question the prevalence and effectiveness of such practices. The fading daylight dictates the pacing of your actions. With each passing hour, indoor labor and preparation take precedence over outdoor tasks. You prioritize mending garments, stacking firewood, and filling water vessels to last through the night. Even minor errors, misaligned logs or poorly tied knots, carry consequences, amplifying discomfort or risk during long nights. Survival in a medieval winter relies on this meticulous attention to detail. The discipline is unglamorous, repetitive, but absolutely vital. As evening approaches, the interplay of shadow and firelight creates a subtle, almost hypnotic rhythm within your home. You move deliberately, adjusting logs, layering blankets, and checking food supplies. Each gesture, though small, contributes to the larger tapestry of household survival. You notice the animals shift closer, the children stir in response to the warmth, and the room breathes as a collective organism. Historical texts note that communal awareness of bodily warmth and positioning could be as crucial as rationing calories, though scholars debate the degree to which this awareness was taught versus intuitively understood. Amid these routines, you take a moment to reflect on the monotony and subtle rituals that structure life. Preparing for night, arranging beds, and tending the fire are not merely chores. They are acts of quiet endurance, mental exercises in planning, foresight, and patience. There is a peculiar satisfaction in maintaining order against the relentless external forces, a sense of control over the uncontrollable. Fringe accounts suggest some households even timed their fire building or bed preparation according to lunar phases or local weather lore, though historians still question how systematic or ritualized these practices were. The final hours before darkness are spent consolidating warmth, wrapping garments, sealing gaps in the walls with whatever materials remain, and ensuring water containers remain unfrozen. Every precaution matters. The night is long, and the temperature will not relent. Your movements are careful, measured, and deliberate, each one a subtle negotiation between survival, energy expenditure, and the comfort of all household members. Anthropological studies note that such cumulative efforts significantly improved winter survivability, though historians still debate the optimality of specific strategies. By the time the last light disappears, you feel the day's weight in every muscle, yet there is a steady confidence born of routine. You have navigated the midday cold, managed resources, and readied both home and body for the coming night. Even in this harsh, relentless winter, the deliberate rhythm of work, rest, and observation allows life to persist. Survival is less about heroism than about consistent, careful, and thoughtful action, a lesson as true today as it was for medieval peasants centuries ago. You shift your attention to the shelter itself, inspecting walls, doors, and thatched roofing for gaps that might let in the merciless wind. Even a small draft can sap warmth from the room and chill bodies more than you might anticipate. In many medieval homes, simple mud, straw, and wooden beams created the structure, but these materials, though common and cheap, demanded constant maintenance. You notice a small crack where frost has pushed the wood apart and quickly wedged straw and rags to seal it. Scholars still argue whether peasants applied specific seasonal repairs systematically or simply responded opportunistically to immediate problems. Inside, the fire's glow casts flickering shadows on worn furniture and patchwork textiles, highlighting the ingenuity of past repairs. You straighten loose planks, smooth woven mats, and tuck stray bedding closer to bodies lying nearby. Each adjustment is small, almost imperceptible, yet contributes to the overall efficiency of heat retention. Fringe sources mention that some households would even place stones near or against hearth walls to radiate warmth slowly overnight, a practice that might seem strange today but speaks to the creative adaptability of peasant life. You pause for a moment, appreciating the subtle orchestration of household heat, a dance of wood, bodies, and stone. Outside, the wind continues its relentless assault on the thatched roof, bending tree branches and whistling through the village. You catch glimpses of your neighbors in the dim light, carrying buckets of water, stacking wood, or huddled near their own fires. Despite the harshness, there is a quiet camaraderie in shared labor and mutual observation. Anthropologists note that such communal awareness, even without direct communication, provided crucial psychological support during long, unforgiving winters. Historians still debate how much formal cooperation occurred versus informal, instinctive mimicry of successful survival strategies. Returning indoors, you tend the animals once more, their bodies huddled together, sharing warmth, and their soft, steady breathing creates a comforting rhythm in the room. You adjust their feed, ensuring that none go hungry overnight, while also observing their condition for signs of cold stress or illness. Historical records suggest that livestock were often treated as living furnaces as much as food sources, though the exact techniques varied across regions. Fringe anecdotes indicate some peasants even created makeshift bedding for animals from straw or old textiles to increase heat retention, a practice debated among scholars for its prevalence and effectiveness. The fire begins to dwindle, signaling the need for careful rationing of fuel. You add small pieces of wood, mindful of burn rate and positioning, trying to maintain steady warmth without exhausting the remaining stock too quickly. The room becomes a microcosm of energy management. Every movement, every log, and every breath influences the overall comfort. Some medieval treatises discuss fire economy, though historians still argue whether such concepts were consciously understood or simply evolved through trial and error. Regardless, the effect is tangible. The difference between careful tending and neglect could mean shivering children or sleepless elders. You take a brief pause to assess your water supply. Frozen buckets and containers demand ingenuity, thawing carefully near the fire without losing too much to evaporation. Water is precious, and the act of managing it under cold conditions is both mundane and critical. Anthropological studies highlight the centrality of water management in survival during extreme winters, though historians still debate the degree to which peasant households standardize these practices. Some fringe accounts even suggest that heated stones or small fire pits were used to keep water partially liquid overnight, a technique likely localized and opportunistic. The interplay of shadow, firelight, and movement continues to shape your evening. You organize small household tasks, repair worn clothing, and double-check sleeping arrangements to ensure everyone can share warmth optimally. Each action is both practical and meditative, a ritualized way of structuring the final hours before night fully settles. Fringe sources mention that certain households may have incorporated chants, songs, or whispered stories to maintain morale, though historians still argue about the prevalence and purpose of these practices. By now, the cold has settled firmly into the house, and you can feel the weight of the winter in every fiber of your being. Yet, you are neither frantic nor idle. There is rhythm in the routine, a careful pacing that balances energy expenditure with necessary labor. Animals shift closer, bedding is readjusted, and logs settle into the hearth in a steady glow. This orchestration of small tasks, repeated daily, forms the invisible scaffolding of survival. Anthropologists note that repetition, anticipation, and routine provided a psychological buffer against the harshness of the season. You glance at your family members, their faces softened in firelight, bodies tucked close for warmth. The room hums with quiet, a living tableau of endurance. Each small preparation, sealing cracks, arranging bedding, tending animals, is a deliberate act against the long night. Scholars still debate how medieval peasants understood the concept of comfort versus mere survival, but the care evident in these actions suggests a nuanced awareness of both physical and emotional needs. Finally, you step back to survey the room, noting the arrangement of bodies, fire, and supplies. Every detail, no matter how minor, contributes to the overall chance of weathering the night. In this environment, attention to small details is a lifeline, and you feel the satisfaction of readiness, however fleeting. Fringe accounts mention that some peasants even kept small ritual objects or charms near the hearth, not solely for superstition, but as psychological aids to face the relentless winter. Historians still debate how widespread or intentional these practices were, but their mention adds a layer of human complexity to the austere scene. The sun dips lower, shadows stretching long across frost-bitten walls, and you realize the dusk arrives far earlier than your body is ready to rest. Each passing minute draws the cold more insistently into cracks you have tried to seal, and the wind outside howls like a chorus of unseen wolves. You adjust clothing layers yet again, tugging on woolen wraps and folding linen over wrists and ankles to trap as much heat as possible. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had standardized techniques for combating early darkness, or if these adjustments were purely instinctual. Fringe accounts suggest that some villagers would even light small clusters of fat or tallow in iron dishes to create pockets of warmth, a practice as dangerous as it was ingenious. Inside, your family moves in slow, deliberate rhythm, each aware of the encroaching night and the need to conserve energy. You notice small details, the faint gleam of ice crystals on the window, the muted creak of floorboards as someone shifts in sleep, the smell of last night's embers mixed with the lingering scent of cooked grains. Every sense is attuned to survival, and yet there is a quiet beauty in the muted interplay of light and shadow. Some anthropologists note that humans naturally develop heightened sensory awareness under environmental stress, and medieval peasants were no exception. The balance between alertness and exhaustion is a constant negotiation. You spend a few moments checking the fire one last time before the darkness claims the room. Logs settle into a slower burn, radiating residual warmth rather than flames. You position stones nearby, recalling that their slow heat release could maintain a fraction of comfort through the night. Historians still debate whether stone placement and similar techniques were widespread knowledge or experimental improvisations. Fringe accounts hint that some peasants would even bury stones in embers briefly to retain warmth for hours, a blend of necessity and subtle ingenuity. Your attention shifts to the sleeping arrangements. Bodies are moved closer together. Even the smallest gap between people or animals can represent lost warmth. Children are tucked near the hearth, older family members closer to walls for insulation, and the animals huddle in the center of the room, radiating steady heat. Anthropological studies show that physical proximity, whether human to human or human to animal, was one of the most effective methods for surviving bitter winters. Historians debate how culturally codified these practices were, but their practical efficacy is unquestioned. Outside, you hear neighbors moving quietly in their own households, an almost imperceptible rhythm of life mirroring your own. Someone drags wood across the frozen yard, another adjusts a shutter to keep out drafts. Despite the harsh isolation of winter, there is a subtle communal awareness, a silent acknowledgement of shared struggle. Fringe sources even suggest that certain villages developed informal signaling methods, smoke patterns, subtle light gestures, to communicate readiness or danger, though the frequency and reliability of such methods remain a matter of debate. The last meal of the day has been consumed with careful attention to efficiency. Small portions of broth or porridge, warmed bread, and whatever preserved vegetables or meat remain. Every calorie counts, and nothing is wasted. You reflect on the hunger you will feel later in the night, a familiar and almost predictable companion. Medieval cookbooks and household records hint at sophisticated rationing techniques, though historians still argue over their actual day-to-day implementation. Some fringe evidence suggests that families occasionally pre-chewed grains or softened food near the fire to stretch caloric intake, a practice likely born out of necessity. Your mind drifts toward lighter moments of human endurance. Stories exchanged by firelight, tales of past winters, jokes about clumsy neighbors, memories of summer warmth, soften the starkness of survival. Scholars note that humor and shared narrative function as critical psychological tools in extreme environments. Fringe accounts even mention that some peasants composed short, improvised songs to coordinate tasks or to soothe children, reinforcing both social bonds and mental resilience. As dusk fades completely, the room grows colder, and you notice the air itself becoming dense with frost. Breath becomes visible in thin streams, and even the fire struggles to maintain more than a faint orange glow. You tuck additional blankets and straw mats around the sleeping areas, checking once again that no drafts compromise the fragile warmth. Historians still argue whether these layering techniques were standard practice or individualized improvisations, yet their effectiveness is evident in every shivering body you notice. A brief pause allows you to observe the environment. The frozen yard, snow-laden rooftops, and distant silhouettes of trees etched sharply against a dim winter sky. The world outside seems harsh, immutable, and indifferent, a reality that medieval peasants must confront daily. Anthropologists suggest that long-term exposure to such conditions fosters acute observational skills and survival intuition. Fringe sources hint at small talismans or ritual objects placed strategically near windows or hearths, possibly for psychological comfort rather than practical effect. Again, debated among scholars. Finally, you settle in to maintain what little warmth remains, listening to the rhythm of the household. Steady animal breathing, occasional rustle of fabric, faint sighs of slumbering humans. Your own body remains partly alert, partly drifting, negotiating comfort with survival. Every movement is intentional. Every sound is both soothing and informative. In these early hours of night, the discipline of preparation, attention to detail, and communal awareness converge, creating a fragile but resilient environment against the unyielding winter outside. The evening meal, humble but vital, has been consumed, and you now move into the repetitive rhythm that defines medieval winter nights. There is a ritualized efficiency in preparing the final sustenance for yourself and your family, stirring thickened pottage slowly over fading embers, slicing stale bread into bite-sized portions, and carefully dividing whatever preserved vegetables or salted meat remains. Each action is deliberate, as if the very act of measured motion wards off exhaustion and cold. Historians still argue whether specific recipes or food allocations were passed down through oral tradition or emerged purely from necessity and trial and error. Fringe anecdotes claim that some peasants would secretly hoard small portions of dried fruit or honey to reward themselves after the day's labors, a tiny, illicit gesture of comfort. Animals, already serving as heat sources during the day, are now subtly repositioned. Sheep, goats, and sometimes even pigs are corralled closer to the central hearth space, their bodies radiating warmth that seeps into the wooden and wattle walls of your shelter. You notice the subtle differences in their breathing patterns and how the warmth accumulates in pockets around the floor. Anthropologists note that this human-animal heat exchange was a widespread, adaptive strategy, though the exact arrangements likely varied from village to village. Fringe accounts also suggest that certain families had learned to predict animal behavior patterns to optimize warmth during the coldest hours. But evidence remains speculative. As you move through these motions, the world outside seems both distant and oppressive. Snowdrifts press against the edges of doors, wind rattles shutters, and the dim glow of the fading fire does little to stave off the psychological weight of early winter nights. Scholars emphasize that the mental endurance required to persist through these months is as critical as physical survival. Historians still argue whether rituals, stories, and songs served primarily a social function or whether they were essential coping mechanisms for maintaining focus and morale. You sit back briefly and listen. The crackle of embers, the gentle sigh of animals, the creak of wooden beams settling in the cold. These ordinary sounds take on extraordinary significance in a winter night where silence can be oppressive, and small noises provide reassurance of life and presence. French sources suggest that some peasants engaged in quiet hums or whispered conversations to reinforce community bonds and stave off fear, a subtle psychological adaptation repeated across generations. The interplay of human, animal, and fire warmth is both practical and symbolic, a dance of survival. Mid-evening work revolves around preserving the home itself. You check windows for leaks, ensure doors are tightly closed, and move additional straw or rushes to plug gaps. This protective choreography is never complete. You understand that each effort may be undone by the relentless encroachment of frost. Anthropologists studying medieval settlement patterns highlight the centrality of micro-environment management in household survival, though the specifics likely depended on local climate and materials. Fringe accounts suggest that some villagers would smear mud or clay along cracks, a practice blending practicality with an almost superstitious belief in warding off the cold. The social rhythm of the household persists, despite the harsh conditions. Children are guided to quiet tasks near the hearth, rubbing and cleaning utensils, helping with minor repairs, or simply learning to keep still and conserve energy. You observe them closely, noting how quickly they adapt to the balance of warmth and restraint. Historians still argue whether child labor in winter was merely a survival necessity or part of a structured education in domestic management. Fringe accounts sometimes describe imaginative games that children played using straw, shadows, or firelight, turning endurance into subtle entertainment. By now, the room feels a delicate equilibrium of heat and cold. The fire emits a soft orange glow, enough to illuminate faces without wasting precious fuel. You move closer to your family, adjusting bedding and mats to maximize shared warmth. Anthropologists note that the arrangement of bodies in confined winter spaces was an essential survival strategy, a fusion of practicality and intimacy dictated by necessity. Fringe tales even describe whispered competitions among families for who could generate the most heat through clever layering of animals and humans, a playful, almost ceremonial approach to winter survival. Storytelling resumes in earnest. By firelight, you exchange quiet anecdotes, local gossip, or reflections on past winters. Humor, wry, understated, and often centered on shared misfortune, emerges naturally. Historians emphasize that such exchanges reinforced social cohesion and mental endurance. Yet the precise content and form varied widely. Fringe accounts suggest some storytellers incorporated exaggerated natural phenomena, mystical creatures, or past hardships to instill both caution and amusement, weaving entertainment into survival education. As the night deepens, tasks become slower, measured more by necessity than urgency. You check firewood levels, rearrange animal bedding, and ensure that no drafts compromise the room. The interplay of light, warmth, and human vigilance reaches a delicate balance, one that must be maintained until the first signs of dawn. Scholars continue to debate whether medieval peasants consciously tracked temperature and humidity or relied on instinct and experience. Fringe evidence hints at mnemonic devices or informal codes used within households to anticipate and manage cold risks, though verification remains limited. Finally, you prepare mentally for the long hours of intermittent sleep that lie ahead. Each movement, gesture, and adjustment is calculated to preserve warmth, minimize disturbance, and maximize comfort in the limited space. Anthropological studies highlight that such preparation is as much a mental discipline as a physical one. Historians still argue whether systematic practices for pre-sleep preparation existed, or whether they were improvised each night. But evidence suggests a blend of learned habit and situational improvisation. With the last remnants of the evening meal cleared and warmth slowly radiating from the hearth and clustered bodies, you shift focus to maintaining morale and mental resilience. The night stretches long, and the cold, persistent and unyielding, demands more than physical stamina. It tests patience and creativity. You light a small, supplementary candle, its flicker dancing across frost-lined windows, and sit to share stories and observations. Humor, darkly laced with irony about the harshness of life, circulates naturally. Even brief laughter seems to amplify the warmth in the room. Historians still argue whether storytelling primarily served an entertainment role or if it was crucial as an early form of psychological survival training. Fringe accounts suggest that some tales involved elaborate exaggerations of frost spirits or mischievous winter imps, designed to teach caution and reinforce communal vigilance. The children, bundled in layers of wool and patched linen, mimic your actions, quietly rubbing hands, checking on the animals, or performing small tasks that keep them occupied. Their behavior is both learning and survival practice. Small movements preserving heat, careful attention preventing accidents, and subtle participation fostering early responsibility. Anthropologists studying medieval households note that even seemingly mundane chores performed during the coldest months contributed to social cohesion and skill development. Fringe reports indicate that some families devised playful competitions for children to see who could maintain the most warmth, an inventive twist on survival education. You check the firewood once more, splitting larger logs with care to ensure the embers will last through the coldest hours. Every fragment saved and efficiently positioned matters, as the night outside stretches long and unrelenting. Historians still argue whether precise routines for fire management were transmitted across generations or developed spontaneously by each household. Some fringe sources claim that certain peasants embedded symbolic markers in wood stacks, almost ritualistically, to invoke protection or good fortune, blending superstition with practical necessity. Animals, now quiet and close, provide not just warmth but also subtle cues about environmental changes. A shiver in a goat or the restless movement of a pig signals drops in temperature or drafts, prompting minor adjustments in bedding or straw placements. Anthropologists highlight this symbiotic monitoring as an informal yet essential component of winter survival, though it is difficult to document precisely. Fringe reports even suggest that certain animals were preferred for proximity based on perceived heat output or calm behavior, an example of folk knowledge guiding practical survival strategies. The room's atmosphere settles into a rhythm of vigilance and comfort. You listen to the faint creak of the roof under frost, the occasional gust rattling shutters, and the soft, steady breathing of those nearby. These ordinary sounds assume extraordinary significance. They are reassurance that life persists. Scholars still debate whether early medieval peasants possessed systematic knowledge of microclimate effects or relied mainly on intuition honed through repeated winters. Fringe anecdotes describe families marking subtle environmental cues, like frost patterns or window condensation, to anticipate worsening conditions, blending observation with folk wisdom. You continue small domestic maintenance, mending rips in garments by dim candlelight, or adjusting bedding to prevent drafts. Each motion is deliberate, each decision balancing warmth preservation against fatigue. Historians note that such meticulous care reflects both survival necessity and deeply ingrained knowledge, though the exact practices varied by region and household. Fringe sources suggest that some winter preparations included marking or rearranging household objects to symbolize protection from cold or misfortune, an intriguing overlap of superstition and pragmatism. As the night deepens, reflective thoughts emerge. You consider the hardships of earlier winters, imagining ancestors who faced similar cold with less comfort and fewer resources. This mental rehearsal, a mixture of gratitude and caution, forms a psychological buffer against despair. Anthropologists argue that mental visualization and recollection likely played an unrecorded but essential role in endurance strategies, though direct evidence is scarce. Fringe accounts describe ritualized storytelling cycles, where adults recount survival strategies alongside moral or cautionary tales, blending education with entertainment. The air, though heavy with warmth from bodies and animals, still carries the bite of frost seeping through gaps in walls. You adjust your seating, layer extra blankets, and encourage others to do the same. Every incremental adjustment is critical, and even a small misjudgment could lead to discomfort or hypothermic stress. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had codified methods for thermal management, or relied entirely on personal and familial experience. Fringe accounts hint at localized, almost ritualized techniques, such as layering bedding with aromatic herbs or dampened straw to enhance insulation, blending practicality with cultural tradition. By now, a delicate, almost meditative rhythm dominates your movements and thoughts. You alternate between tending minor tasks, checking animals, observing fire, and sharing whispered conversations. The slow passage of time, punctuated by small sounds and subtle motions, reinforces a sense of both endurance and patience. Anthropologists note that this interplay of work, observation, and social connection represents a sophisticated form of environmental adaptation, though its subtleties were never formally recorded. Fringe sources suggest that some households embedded small superstitions or symbolic gestures into these routines, enhancing morale and creating psychological stability. Finally, you allow yourself brief moments of stillness, focusing on breath, warmth, and the subtle ambient sounds of a medieval winter night. Your body begins the gentle process of winding down while maintaining vigilance, each micro-adjustment ensuring continued survival. Historians continue to debate the extent to which peasants consciously managed these nocturnal routines versus relying on ingrained habit and instinct. Fringe anecdotes note that quiet, almost imperceptible rituals, tapping logs, repositioning bedding, murmuring protective words, were passed down informally, serving as both survival tactic and folk tradition. Eventually, without any clear signal, the household begins preparing the night space itself, shifting from shared wakefulness into something closer to rest, though never true relaxation. You rise carefully, joints stiff from cold and long sitting, and begin the practice choreography of bedding. Straw mattresses are shaken and redistributed. Clumps move to fill hollows where warmth escapes fastest. Wool blankets, never quite clean, never quite dry, are layered with deliberate logic rather than comfort. The goal is not softness but insulation. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood heat retention in any theoretical sense, or whether this was purely experiential knowledge refined by loss, illness, and memory. You place the youngest and weakest closest to the fire's residual warmth, even though the flames are now little more than glowing coals. This is not sentimentality. It is triage. The elderly and children suffer cold faster, and medieval mortality records, where they exist, confirm that winter disproportionately claimed them. A quieter, more unsettling truth lingers beneath the routine. Everyone knows someone who simply did not wake one winter morning. Fringe accounts suggest that some households slept in rotating shifts during extreme cold, keeping one person half awake to tend embers, though evidence remains anecdotal. Clothing is not removed so much as rearranged. You loosen outer layers just enough to allow blood flow, while keeping undergarments tight to preserve heat. Boots stay on or are placed within arm's reach, because frost inside leather can turn them rigid by morning. You have learned this the hard way before. Archaeological finds of medieval footwear show extensive internal wear, suggesting they were often worn indoors during winter nights. Historians still debate whether this was primarily for warmth or readiness in case of fire or intrusion. The animals settle too, their breathing slow and heavy in the shared space. You adjust a goat's tether to prevent tangling in the night, listening to the faint scrape of hoof against packed earth. Their body heat remains one of the room's most reliable assets. There is a strange intimacy in this closeness, human and animal bound not by affection, but by necessity. Some fringe theories propose that medieval peasants attributed protective qualities to certain animals during winter nights, particularly cows, believed to ward off sickness simply by their presence. Before lying down, you conduct one last circuit of the room. You press a palm against the wall where frost creeps inward, feel the damp cold beneath your skin, and stuff another bundle of straw into the gap. This is maintenance performed dozens of times each winter. Never fully successful, always necessary. Historians still argue whether medieval houses were intentionally designed to breathe rather than seal, or whether drafts were simply an accepted failure of construction methods. You extinguish all but the smallest ember, careful not to let darkness arrive too suddenly. Night blindness is real, and stumbling now could mean injury you cannot afford. Medieval medical texts mention broken limbs in winter with grim regularity, often fatal due to infection or immobility. Fringe medical lore claimed that cold itself entered wounds like a spirit, a belief that likely reinforced caution during nighttime movement. Finally, you lower yourself onto the bedding. The straw crackles softly beneath you, releasing faint, dry scents of harvest long past. You curl instinctively, knees drawn up to reduce exposed surface area, a posture shared by humans across centuries. Others settle nearby, bodies forming a shared heat mass, a living insulation layer. Historians note that medieval sleep was often communal, not out of preference but survival logic. Privacy is a luxury the cold does not allow. Sleep does not arrive immediately. Your body hovers in a half state, listening. The wind tests the walls again. The roof creaks. Somewhere outside, ice shifts or a branch snaps under weight. Each sound is assessed automatically. Danger, weather, nothing. Scholars still debate how chronic environmental stress shaped medieval cognition, but it is clear that vigilance never truly shut off. Fringe theories even suggest that this constant alertness altered sleep cycles, making deep sleep shorter and lighter during winter months. Your breath fogs briefly before the shared warmth stabilizes. You adjust a blanket, then another, ensuring it seals at the shoulders. Exposed skin is the enemy. Even your face is partially covered, though breathing through fabric brings its own discomfort. Medieval illustrations occasionally depict sleepers with cloth drawn high over their heads, a detail long overlooked but deeply practical. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic modesty or simple thermal management. Time loses its meaning. There is no clock, only sensation. Cold presses inward slowly, like a tide. You respond without fully waking, pulling fabric tighter, shifting closer to another body, tucking feet beneath calves. These micro-movements happen dozens of times a night. Fringe accounts from later folkloric traditions describe winter spirits testing sleepers, pulling at blankets or chilling toes. Metaphors perhaps born from these unconscious adjustments. At some point you surface briefly into awareness. The fire has dimmed further. The room smells of smoke, wool, animal breath. No one speaks. This silence is not peace. It is conservation. Words waste heat, energy, moisture. Medieval monastic rules often mandated silence at night, but peasants followed a harsher law written by temperature. Historians still debate how much medieval daily behavior was shaped by doctrine versus environment, but winter erases that distinction quickly. You drift again, knowing you will wake before dawn, not by choice but by cold. The night is not something to conquer, it is something to endure in segments. Each stretch of unconsciousness is a small victory. Fringe medical beliefs held that the soul wandered during sleep and was more vulnerable in winter, a superstition that perhaps encouraged people to sleep lightly and close together. As hours pass, the shared warmth fluctuates. Someone shifts, breaking the heat seal, and you instinctively compensate. This unspoken coordination is learned, not taught. Anthropologists studying communal sleep in harsh climates note similar patterns across cultures, separated by geography but united by cold. Historians still argue whether such coordination was conscious or purely adaptive behavior ingrained from childhood. Toward the deepest part of night, the cold is at its most aggressive. The fire is nearly gone now, and frost reclaims territory. Your nose stings. Fingers ache. You wake fully for a moment, considering whether to feed the embers. Fuel is precious, but so is circulation. You decide against it, trusting dawn will arrive before danger does. Fringe traditions speak of winter nights as negotiations rather than battles, and in this moment, that feels accurate. You settle once more, breath shallow, body compact, mind dimming. Tomorrow will bring repetition, cold, labor, restraint. But for now, survival is measured in minutes of rest. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants experienced winter as unrelenting misery or simply as life's baseline. Lying here, neither interpretation feels complete. It is harder, quieter, and strangely ordinary. Sleep, when it comes, is never continuous. It fractures into shallow segments, each one negotiated between cold, stiffness, and the body's insistence on rest. You surface again not because you are ready, but because your toes burn with that dull, dangerous ache that signals numbness turning toward harm. You flex them slowly inside your boots, grateful you kept them on. Medieval skeletal remains often show signs of chronic joint damage, and historians still argue whether this was driven more by labor or by repeated cold exposure during nights exactly like this. You do not sit up. That would waste heat and invite stiffness. Instead, you curl tighter, pulling knees inward, pressing calves against thighs. This posture compresses organs, restricts breathing slightly, and yet preserves warmth more effectively than stretching out. Across Northern Europe, similar sleeping postures appear in marginalia and folk art, suggesting this was not accidental but learned behavior. Fringe theories even suggest that medieval lullabies and prayers subtly encouraged curling, referencing womb-like safety against the cold. Nearby, someone coughs, a dry, rasping sound that echoes briefly in the small space before fading. Winter coughs are common, persistent, and dangerous. Medieval medical texts describe cold humors settling in the chest during winter, a framework that mixed observation with theory. Historians still debate whether such humoral explanations hindered or helped treatment, but it is clear that respiratory illness peaked during cold months. You listen carefully, judging whether the cough deepens. Serious sickness in winter is a logistical crisis, not just a health concern. The fire gives a final sigh as an ember collapses into ash. Darkness thickens, not visually. You can see nothing anyway, but psychologically. Without flame, the night feels heavier, more absolute. Some fringe folkloric traditions claim this is when winter spirits roam most freely. But even stripped of myth, this is the coldest stretch. The walls radiate chill now instead of blocking it. You press your shoulder into the straw, seeking whatever insulation remains beneath. Your mind drifts, not into dreams but into memory fragments. A past winter, harsher than this one. A neighbor's house silent one morning, door unopened. Medieval parish records occasionally note deaths clustered after severe cold snaps, though details are sparse. Historians still argue whether underreporting masks the true winter toll, especially among the poor. You do not dwell on this long. Dwelling burns energy, and energy is heat. Another waking comes when the goat shifts, tugging its tether. You reach out without opening your eyes, steadying the rope. The animal settles again, warmth resuming its slow, steady output. There is no sentimentality here, only mutual dependence. Archaeozoological studies confirm that livestock were often kept indoors during winter, despite sanitation risks. Fringe interpretations suggest this proximity also reinforced social hierarchies, reminding humans nightly of their place within a broader survival web. Your breath feels thicker now, each inhale carrying the faint taste of smoke and animal musk. The air is stale but warm enough to function. Medieval homes lacked chimneys for much of the period, relying instead on smoke holes or simple ventilation. Historians still argue whether chronic smoke inhalation shortened life expectancy or whether adaptation mitigated its effects. Either way, this air is preferable to freezing clarity. Time stretches. Without light or sound, the night becomes an abstract endurance test. You count breaths without meaning to, a slow rhythm that keeps panic away. Panic spikes heart rate burns fuel. Somewhere in the distance, perhaps hours away, a rooster shifts, not crowing yet but preparing. This is one of the few reliable indicators that dawn still exists. Fringe rural traditions sometimes treated the rooster as a protective symbol against winter darkness, though practicality likely came first. You wake again, this time from a sharper cold. The shared heat has diminished as bodies shift unconsciously apart. You edge closer to the nearest form, apologizing silently though no apology is needed. Communal sleep erases such boundaries. Medieval moralists occasionally criticize this closeness, but winter overrides doctrine. Historians still debate how often ideals of modesty were bent or ignored in extreme conditions, especially among peasants. Your fingers ache now, stiff and clumsy. You tuck hands under your thighs, sacrificing circulation slightly to protect extremities. This trade-off is familiar. Frostbite is rare indoors, but numbness can still cause damage. Fringe medical beliefs warned against letting cold settle in joints overnight, advising movement even during sleep. Whether such advice was followed is unclear, but instinct often aligns with tradition. At some point, exhaustion outweighs vigilance. You slip into a deeper sleep, brief but dense. Dreams flicker. Nothing coherent, just sensations. Wind, weight, warmth returning. Scholars studying sleep deprivation note similar dream patterns in modern subjects exposed to cold stress. Historians still argue whether medieval dream accounts reflect psychological strain or symbolic storytelling layered afterward. You wake abruptly to silence that feels different. Not warmer, not safer, but altered. The cold remains, but it has plateaued. This is the turning point. The deepest night has passed. Even without light, you sense it. Circadian rhythms persist even without clocks. Medieval monastic schedules relied heavily on bodily awareness of night phases, and peasants shared this skill. Fringe theories suggest winter sharpened this internal timing out of necessity. A faint grayness begins to leak into the space, imperceptible at first. You open your eyes, seeing nothing then shapes. The roof beams emerge slowly, familiar and reassuring. Your body protests as awareness returns fully. Stiff neck, sore hips, cold feet, but relief accompanies it. You have endured another night. Survival in winter is cumulative. Someone else stirs, then another. No one speaks yet. Speech comes later when fire returns. For now, movement is minimal, coordinated unconsciously to preserve shared warmth until the last possible moment. Historians still argue whether medieval mornings began with prayer or labor, but in winter they begin with assessment. Who is moving? Who is coughing? Who is not? You test your fingers again. Pain returns, which is good. Numbness would be worse. You flex joints slowly, preparing for the effort of standing. The cold floor waits patiently. Outside, the world is still locked in frost, but dawn approaches. Fringe folklore sometimes treated dawn as a truce between winter and humanity, temporary and fragile. As the light strengthens, responsibility returns. Fire must be coaxed back to life. Water must be fetched again. The cycle resumes. But for this moment, balanced between night and day, you allow yourself a small internal acknowledgement. You are still here. Medieval winter has not claimed you this time. Historians still debate whether peasants frame survival as triumph or expectation. Lying here, neither seems accurate. It is simply continuation. You inhale, brace, and begin to uncurl. You rise slowly because rising quickly is how injuries happen. Muscles that have been held tight all night resist the idea of bearing weight again. You roll onto one knee, pause, then the other, letting blood return to places that forgot its warmth hours ago. The floor is exactly as cold as you expect, a sharp reminder that the night has not truly loosened its grip. Dawn does not mean warmth. It only means visibility. Someone else reaches the hearth before you. There is no spoken agreement, just habit. Ash is brushed aside, fingers searching for the faint promise of last night's embers. When one glows, barely, It feels like a victory far larger than it should. You add kindling carefully, breath held, because blowing too hard wastes heat and too soft achieves nothing. Fire-making in winter is a practiced restraint. Archaeological hearth remains show layered ash patterns, and historians still argue whether these reflect daily relighting or continuous smoldering across seasons. The flame catches. Thin, blue at first, then yellow. Light spreads unevenly across the room, revealing the damage of the night. Frost traced along the inside wall where insulation failed. A damp patch near the door where meltwater crept in. Straw flattened beyond usefulness. These are not surprises, they are assessments. Medieval winter mornings begin not with hope, but with inventory. You extend your hands toward the fire, palms open, not too close. Burns heal poorly in winter, and everyone knows someone who lost dexterity that way. A fringe belief persists in some regions that fire steals as much strength as it gives if approached too eagerly. Superstition aside, patience matters. Heat arrives slowly, in layers, just like everything else. Outside, the first sounds of the village emerge. A door creaks. A cough carries through the frozen air. A rooster finally commits to its announcement. Hoarse, but determined. These sounds are signals. They mean the shared ordeal continues collectively. Medieval communities depended heavily on auditory cues, especially in winter when sight was limited. Historians still debate how much coordination occurred without formal planning, but survival often synchronized itself. You eat what remains of yesterday's food, not because it tastes good, but because it is fuel. Bread hardened overnight is dipped briefly near the fire to soften it. The smell is faintly comforting. Medieval diets in winter leaned heavily on grains and preserved foods, a fact well documented in manorial records. Fringe theories suggest certain families hoarded spices not for flavor, but because pungency tricked the body into feeling warmer. Whether effective or not, belief itself can steady the mind. As light strengthens, the interior loses its intimacy. Shadows retreat. The space feels smaller, more exposed. Night allows closeness. Day demands action. You gather tools slowly, checking handles for cracks caused by cold contraction. A broken tool in winter is not just inconvenient. It can end a season's work. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants preferred to repair tools immediately or adapt around damage, but necessity often decided faster than habit. You step outside again. The cold meets you without ceremony. Frost crunches underfoot, loud in the quiet morning. Breath clouds your vision briefly before drifting away. The sky is pale, almost colorless, as if exhausted by its own effort. Snow has not fallen overnight, which is a relief. Snow insulates eventually, but first, it steals heat mercilessly. The fields remain useless, locked tight. You know this already, but you look anyway. This is not denial, it is ritual. Medieval calendars often depict winter months as idle or restful, but that image misleads. Winter labor shifts inward, into maintenance, endurance, and preparation. Historians still debate how productive winter truly was, but productivity is the wrong metric. Survival is the only one that matters. You move through the motions of the morning, each task a continuation of yesterday, which was a continuation of the day before. Feed animals sparingly. Check water sources for ice. Reinforce the door with whatever scraps remain. None of this feels heroic. That is precisely the point. Heroism burns out quickly. Routine endures. There is a moment, Brief, easily missed, when the sun clears the horizon enough to strike the frost at an angle. The world glints, suddenly sharp and almost beautiful. You notice it without stopping. Beauty is acknowledged, not indulged. Fringe folklore sometimes described winter light as deceptive, luring travelers into complacency. Whether myth or memory, caution remains. As the morning settles, the cold stabilizes. It does not improve, but it becomes predictable. Predictability is a gift. You adjust your movements accordingly, conserving effort, minimizing exposure. Medieval peasants developed an intuitive understanding of thermoregulation long before the term existed. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was consciously taught or simply absorbed, but you carry it without naming it. Eventually, the rhythm of the day reasserts itself. Chores replace vigilance. Hunger replaces fear. Fatigue returns, quieter than before. Tomorrow will look much like today. That knowledge does not depress you, it steadies you. Endless variation would be worse. You pause once more at the threshold, looking back into the dim interior. Fire crackles. Breath fogs. Bodies move slowly but deliberately. This space, imperfect and fragile, has held. For now, that is enough. Winter has not ended. It likely will not soon. But you have completed a full cycle, night to night, cold to cold, and learned nothing new because there was nothing new to learn. Survival is repetition refined. You step forward into the day that waits. As you settle back now, let the pace of that winter day loosen its hold on you. The cold, the caution, the quiet calculations. They belong to another body, another century. You carried them for a while, just long enough to understand how endurance used to feel when survival depended less on technology and more on attention. Notice how much of that day passed without drama. No great victories, no sudden disasters, just the steady management of limited warmth, limited energy, limited certainty. That is what most lives have always been made of, even if history books prefer sharper moments. The medieval peasant did not conquer winter. They negotiated with it, hour by hour, breath by breath. As you rest now, your own warmth is easier, more reliable. You do not need to count embers or listen for the wind changing direction. You can allow your body to release the vigilance that once kept people alive through nights like these. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow. There is no frost creeping under your door. If thoughts drift back to the cold straw, the aching joints, the quiet resilience, let them pass gently. They have done their work. You have followed a single day all the way through, and that is enough. Tomorrow can belong to someone else, some other story. For now, there is nothing you need to survive. There is only rest. Sweet dreams.